Hey guys, so today I'm going to talk about vetoes for like pros, and I'll be using TSM as an example because they are a pretty easy one to explain. So before vetoes actually happens, almost all people that are on lounge already do the vetoes beforehand in order to get the odds. And this is because there's a huge difference in odds between like what the veto format is. So the three veto formats for BO3s are veto, veto, pick, pick, veto, veto, and then you get the last map, or the two vetoes and then the last three maps are played, or one veto each, one pick each, and then one random map from the last three maps. So each, depending on the vetoes format in the BO3, you can see a 1 to 10% difference in the actual odds for the match. So let's look at TSM. Let's order their maps from best to worst. So you got Overpass is probably TSM's best map. Their second best is Dust 2, Inferno, Mirage, Train, Cache, and Cobble. Honestly, I think TSM, Cache, and Cobble skill is about the same level, but they veto Cobble more often. Alright, so the biggest mistake I see people make is that TSM best map is Dust 2. You can say that TSM is the world's best Dust 2 team, but the thing is TSM is by far the best Overpass team. So let's look at TSM. They probably only have a 1% or 2% or 5% advantage against some of the other tier 1 teams on Dust 2. But on Overpass, they are by far the best team, where they have a 10% or 15% advantage over every other team. Alright, so what is TSM veto potential maps? So most common TSM vetoes is either Cobble or Cache, and Train, and sometimes Mirage. So why does TSM veto Cobble? That's their least played map, and they have a negative win rate on Cobble. So TSM most common veto will be Cobble. Sometimes you'll see TSM also veto Cache, and this is because TSM win rate isn't the highest against other tier 1 teams on the map Cache. TSM has like a high ass win rate on Train, but they do veto Train just because they don't like it, even though they have a pretty high win rate, beating VP 3 times in a row on that map. And TSM's fourth veto usually is Mirage, and this is because Navi and Virtus Pro are like, that's their main maps, and a lot of tier 2 teams main map is Mirage, so vetoing Mirage with TSM is also fine. So let's look at the match TSM just played against Navi. So TSM vetoed Train, Navi vetoed Cache, which they do 100% of the time just because they don't play the map. TSM picked Dust 2, Navi picked Cobble, TSM vetoed Mirage, and Navi vetoed Inferno, and the last map was Overpass. So the maps was Dust 2, Cobble, and Overpass, which personally I don't really like, just because all these three maps, Navi has such a high percent chance of beating TSM, and Navi's actually favored to beat TSM on Cobble just because TSM doesn't really play that map, and that's probably one of Navi's average map. So here's how the veto probably should have went down when I did it before. TSM should have vetoed Cobblestone because it's the worst map, and Navi pretty much just slaughtered Liquid, who's a decent team on Cobble, taking VP to OT and beating Fnatic on Cobble. Then Navi would have vetoed Cache because that's what Navi always does. But the thing is, TSM, before even going into the match, they have to ask themselves, if Navi doesn't veto Cache, will we pick it or not? The reason why that Navi might not veto Cache, even though they almost always do, is because TSM, they just lost to G2 in like a pretty slaughter, and they just lost to Cloud9 also on Cache. But so the first thing going to this, like, TSM should have asked themselves, if Navi doesn't veto Cache, do we pick Cache? But the thing is, Navi almost always vetoes Cache, so we probably don't have to think about that. Alright, so then, for the first map pick for TSM, they should have picked either Overpass or Inferno. Personally, I would have went with Inferno, just because it's probably the map that TSM has the highest chance against Navi. Like, even though a lot of people think you should pick Overpass or Dust 2, I'm actually going to be going with Inferno, just because that's like the highest like odd difference between the two teams. The Navi would have picked Train, which would have been fine with, because we beat Navi 2 times on that map and they only beat us once. And we have a 17-6 record on Train, with being the world's best Train team, VP 3 times in a row on that map. Then TSM would have vetoed Mirage, just because that's Navi's good map and our average map for us. And Navi probably would have vetoed Dust 2, just because they're a shaky map against Liquid, and Navi thinks their best map is probably Overpass. And the last swap would have been Overpass, which favors us. So the maps would have been Inferno, Train, Overpass. That sounds a lot better than Dust 2 Cobble Overpass in my opinion. So the only reason why I don't like Dust 2 is that TSM only has a 5 to 10% advantage over Navi. And on Inferno and Overpass, you have a greater than a 10% advantage. And picking Inferno doesn't allow Navi to veto it. And Navi probably won't veto Overpass because that's also Navi's best map is Overpass. But the thing is, we're so much better than Navi on that map that it's like a good thing to do. So these are just my thoughts like going into vetoes, since you pretty much have to write it down what you think the vetoes are gonna be before every lounge map. It kind of sucks that sometimes when teams don't follow the vetoes, but it's like whatever.